Hey, welcome to the reaction to the second reading of the third chapter of How to Lose a Planet, the Afrofuture epic. Couple of things. One, there's a paragraph that starts with generations ago, humans lost Earth. And then I go into what's known as backstory. Backstory is often needed to provide a proper context for the action that is happening currently in the story. So here's the thing about backstory. Sometimes there's too much of it, which can slow down the momentum. Sometimes there's too little of it, which does not provide enough information for why things are happening the way they're happening during the course of your story. One question I asked several professors during my time in grad school was, how do you know when to summarize a scene or write the scene out, or how much backstory is enough? And they all pretty much said the same thing. You just kind of know. I think that's one of those things that takes practice, and one draft after the other kind of plays into that Ernest Hemingway quote, the first draft is shit, where you just kind of like, or somebody else who said, all writing is rewriting, so kind of rewriting over and over again until it just feels kind of right. But for me, I intentionally put 3 paragraphs of backstory, then went back to dialogue. So it was dialogue, backstory, 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 dialogue. I did that because of this book, A Hero's Journey, written by this guy, Joseph Campbell. It was published in the 50s, and it was based on this research Joseph Campbell had done, taking in stories from varied cultures going back millennia, pulling together the things that he thought were similar in creating this storytelling structure called The Hero's Journey. One of the things he noticed is that the number 3 is very prominent in these stories culturally. I mean, it didn't matter what culture it was, but throughout the world and throughout time, the number 3 was very popular. So whether it's 3 little pigs, Goldilocks and the 3 bears, 3 in the Bible. There's this story about this ancient Norse mythology, the story about Thor trying to kill this giant with his hammer. He hits the giant 3 times before he gives up. So 3 is pretty prominent. And because it's something that crossed cultural lines and has just stood the test of time, I like to use number 3 for a lot of things in my story. There is no hard and fast explanation for it. The best one that I cling to is the thought that 3 is long enough to be a pattern, but not so long that it feels like a list, right? So 3 paragraphs of backstory, hopefully it feels like a pattern and it doesn't feel like I'm dragging the story down with stuff that happened long before Kato was even born. So that was my intention there. And I think, hopefully, fingers crossed, you'll see more backstory in chapter 4, which does the same thing. So there's that. There's your storytelling tip. True story. So the mention of sex. So Kato has sexual dreams about Lacey, even though he doesn't even like her. And in earlier versions, Kato's first interaction with Lacey, he had a lot of internalized thoughts about her that were sexual because he was an inmate and he hadn't seen a woman or spoken to a woman in a really long time. Most of my classmates were fine with this and totally got this. I had one classmate who thought, I don't know, just kind of hated it and said, he's sexualizing her. And I was like, yeah, duh, he's in prison. But I toned that down for other reasons. But here's something interesting, and this isn't so much about sex as it is about critiques. So Vector, originally, he was oppressive of inmates and kind of a jerk the way he was with Kato here, but it had a sexual undertone. And I did that because when I was in prison, 99% sure this guard had a crush on me. And I kind of suspected because we'd have conversations, but she had this giant engagement ring, so I didn't think anything of it. And then one day, another inmate brought it up. And he brought it up because she was walking up and down the hallway, making sure nobody's getting stabbed or raped during her free time. I was in the gym just hitting the heavy bag. So what does she do? She's walking down the hall, she sees me, she beelines toward me past all the inmates, doesn't even look at the other inmates in the gym, just to talk to me while I'm sweating it out in the heavy bag. And then another inmate comes up and says, bro, did she just ignore everybody and come straight to you? And it's like, damn it, she did. Which made me nervous because I didn't want to get caught up in some stupid prison situation because a guard has a crush on me. Like some other inmate wants to fight me because he has a crush on a guard who has a crush on me. I just want to do my time and go home, keep it quiet and just be really, really boring. So my original iteration of Vector was a sexual undertone to his jerkish ways toward inmates. One classmate took exception to that because they thought that because Vector was an LGBT character, which isn't what I said, but I guess they felt that he was coded that way. They didn't use that word, but I'll just say that's what they thought. That I was playing into an anti-gay trope and about gay people being creeps. And that's an important conversation to have. Here's why it was a problem. First of all, she went over 10 minutes and really after a while I just felt like she was talking about me, not the story. And this is why. Because if we're going to have a conversation about the first character that you think of as being LGBT and playing into a trope, but not have a conversation about the first black character being in prison, which is also a trope, then something's going on there, because that classmate doesn't know my sexual orientation. At least I never divulged that information. So feeling comfortable to say, you're playing into anti-gay trope with this LGBT character, right? While not knowing my sexual orientation, but knowing I'm black and not saying anything about the black character, who's the first presentation of a black character, and they're in prison, showed me that there was something uneven going on. And it got pretty personal. And so after class, I emailed my professor and said, yeah, listen, I'm a pretty thick-skinned human being, and that hurt my feelings. And my professor wrote back and said, yeah, during their commute home, they realized something was wrong about that, and they should have stepped in. They asked me if I wanted them to speak to the classmate, and I said, you know what, do what you feel is best. Because at that point, I decided, so here's the thing. With workshops, there's a rule. While people are criticizing your work, you have to be quiet. You can't respond, you can't explain, you just kind of have to sit there and let them go through it. This is going back to, I don't know, there's some rule invented by old white men in the 1930s, I think, maybe the 1950s, long time ago. Anyway, after that class, I decided I'm not going to honor this rule. This is ridiculous because this got really personal and really hurt my feelings. And so not in that class, but a year later, something similar happened, and I just popped a can full of smoke for the whole class. The professor got some too. And I'm fine with that. And the point is, there are really great criticisms. Even like stuff that doesn't feel good because it might make you feel silly or inadequate, or how could I overlook this obvious thing, or how could I mess this up, or how could I play into this negative stereotype or negative trope. Like I had classmates who definitely wrote magical Negro stories or white savior stories, and I remember I brought that up. And so listen, I'm not coming for you because I think it's actually a really easy thing to do because there's so many stories like that out there in the world, and so you absorb them without constantly knowing what you're doing. A really popular story of a magical Negro story, if you don't know what that is the Green Mile. That gets referenced a lot. And yeah, people often have thoughts about the way Stephen King writes black characters. So I think those are important conversations to have. And you can present those kind of critiques in a positive way. That's really good. And I will swear up and down that the criticism that I received from my classmates and my professors definitely helped make How to Lose a Planet, the Afrofuture Epic, a lot better. Honestly, I really benefited from that. That said, there are also critiques that miss the mark. And this is more about intention than impact. Like, say your story is sci-fi and your classmate, their focus is romantic fiction. So maybe they don't really fully grasp what you're trying to pull off. So their critiques just might not be that relevant. No shade, no diss. It's just that they're not really connecting with what you're trying to attempt. Totally fine, that happens all the time. But there's also critiques that are trash, just flat out trash. And I encourage you to get comfortable with that, and actually develop that skill set of recognizing good critique, irrelevant critique, trash critique. And if you have to, speak up on that. For me, the trash critiques are the ones that do feel personal or do feel obstinate, or like almost a willful refusal to consider what the work is trying to do. I watched this YouTube video where this actor, Jeff Daniels, said that just like critiques will review his television shows or his plays, he's reviewing their critiques. Like, if he thinks a critique is bad or a critique is trash, he'll say so. And I think that's actually really good for growth and your mental health. And also it's just like a product of storytelling, because really a critique is a story about your story or about your work. So being able to examine that critique will also help develop your storytelling muscles. So let me see. Critiques, 3 paragraphs, and yeah, that's it. Those are my thoughts. Deuces.